Imagine if you could bring your online persona to your regular life.
They're being friends with, having relationships with people that they've never met in person.
The way that you present online is like polar opposite to how you actually present in person.
What's up, guys? John here with Blueprint Mental Health, welcoming you to the second episode of The Blueprint, a mental health podcast brought to you from the folks of Blueprint Mental Health. So we are the folks of Blueprint Mental Health. Today, I am here with two members of our clinical team. I have Sam back here from last episode, and today we have Carly joining us for the first time. Thinking before we get started, it'd be good for you guys to maybe talk a little bit about the clients that you work with, so folks have an idea of what it is you do.
Yeah, again, my name is Sam. I work with littles, so that is ages 5 to 13, and a few teens and young adults. ADHD, anxiety, body image, those are typically the things that I usually help different people with.
Yeah, and I'm Carly. I'm another one of the clinicians here. So I see ages 10 and up. I see a pretty wide range of clients. But yeah, same thing, dealing with a lot of anxiety and depression, a lot of ADHD. I do have a good handful of like LGBTQ plus clients on my caseload right now. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. And me, these days, I don't even really know who I work with all that much. Full spectrum of different kinds of clients, but I do have a significant handful of angsty young men on my caseload. I think some of the younger guys like working with a male, and I like working with them. So without further ado, let's get into this second episode of our podcast. Today's topic is the social media manifesto. We're going to talk about social media, and we named it the Social Media Manifesto because I thought that shit sounded kind of cool, to be honest with you. But anyway, let's get into it. And before we get into what we're seeing with our clients and behind the scenes and how it's impacting them socially, and when it comes to their mental health and when it comes to their motivation, first I want to talk about our own personal experiences when it comes to social media. So Sam, what is your relationship like with social media?
My relationship with social media is actually pretty cool. So in addition to obviously being a therapist here at Blueprint, I also help with our social media because of my relationship with social media. I have a food Instagram with a decent amount of followers, in my opinion. So I will go to different new local restaurants, work with different marketing agencies to be able to get the word out about different new cool restaurants. So it's a lot of marketing stuff that I'm learning, as well as learning how to network, as well as I'm one of our youngest therapists here. So also I'm on TikTok and Instagram, and I have all of the different things. So usually I'm the one that gives us all the ding terms. But yeah, I definitely doom scroll. That's something I do often. But I think my relationship with social media is actually pretty good, even though I'm obviously on it a lot, but I know when to set that boundary.
Do you has there ever been a time in your life that you said to yourself, you know what, I need to scale it back a little bit? And if so, How did that work out for you?
Specifically with my food Instagram, so I run it with my best friend. So it's good because we both can kind of split the time that we spend on it. There's times when we're really overwhelmed here and I'm like, crap, I don't have time to post in all these engagement groups and do all of going here, there, and the other place of driving 45 minutes to an hour to go to these restaurants, etc. So yeah, there is times where I'm like, crap, I need to take it back. It's not that it's important, but it's not that important that it should get in the way of my own mental health. But then also even just with Instagram and TikTok itself, there's times when I'm like, maybe I should put a screen limit on it for myself.
It's time management.
Yeah, because it's I go on TikTok and Instagram instead of doing my notes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Noted. How about you, Carly?
Yeah, pretty similar, I would say. I mean, I'm definitely on all the apps, and I love staying up to date on the trends and the jokes and the memes and everything. So that's something that I do enjoy and I think can be like a positive way for me to connect with people. Like I don't know. I connect with people a lot through humor, and so like jokes on social media and memes and stuff like I think is funny and fun to share. But then, you know, like you were saying, you have to have a healthy relationship with it and have a balance. You can't be like glued to your phone all the time, or I can at least. And you know, so definitely important to take breaks. Like I think what you were saying about social media breaks, it is important because like and I mean I'm sure we'll get into this more later, but while it is um a really positive thing in a lot of ways, you know, you can share information, share jokes, things like that. Um you're not connected to your actual life, and I fall into that trap a lot where it's like a tool to not stay present, which sometimes is nice and sometimes is to a detriment. So that's something I just have to, you know, always remember to balance and put aside sometimes.
And speaking of memes, right? Me, you, and a couple of other therapists here, we have like a group chat within Instagram where we send each other therapist related memes.
Yeah.
So it's like really validating for us to see these like funny different like memes or reels or TikToks that like really speak to like our career as therapists. So like there's obviously that spectrum too.
I try to share those on because I have my personal Instagram account and then my therapist Instagram account, and the reason why I made that is because of kind of posts like that where I thought it was like funny to share, and but just like validating too to see, oh my gosh, I'm not the only therapist that kind of like goes through that, or like I don't know, I just like following other therapists too to see different perspectives, and I may not, you know, agree with all of them or whatever, but it's just cool to see what's out there. And yeah, I mean, I definitely, my personal account is more like whatever, doom scrolling and silly things, but my therapy account, I really do get a lot of like good information and good different perspectives, or like things that I've been talking to my clients about but like explained in a different way, and like, oh, that's cool, like maybe I'll kind of try to bring that up in session. I definitely get ideas from social media, which I guess could be a blessing and a curse, but yeah, I just like the exposure to different information or different ways of looking at things too, so that in that regard it's kind of a positive for me when I'm on that account.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sitting here, I'm listening to you guys, and I'm like, wow, they have such a healthier relationship with social media than I do. You know, because honestly, like my own personal experience, like I would consider myself in some ways like a functioning addict when it comes to social media. From time to time, you know, a lot of the talks that I do and a lot of the conversations I have with my clients is about how this stuff is impacting us in a negative way, right? But it's coming from my personal experience. Like I don't claim to be getting it right all the time, right? And when I reference as being like kind of a functioning addict, like the content that I watch, sure, these days, because we just had a new baby, I get a lot of now like baby videos that are showing up in my feed, which is cool, right? Wholesome. I'm learning something from it and everything, all good. But I also am guilty of going down the rabbit hole of like political videos, police shooting videos kind of filled my algorithm, you know, like, and, you know, I have this relationship where I mentioned it in the last podcast where I have this goal for myself that every morning I wake up and I read for an hour before I look at my phone. And, you know, if I don't have a book to read, though, I find myself scrolling. I can find myself, if I have just a break really quick between clients, somehow like instinctively running and opening up the Instagram, right? It's something that I'm aware of, that I realize that, okay, it works for me. You know, like I'm on it more than I'd like to be, but I'm also doing all these positive things throughout my day, right? I get up, I read, I go to the gym, I meditate, I work, I have all these different hobbies. But for me, it's kind of like, I know that if I could cut this out of my life, that I would level up, that I would be a better version of myself, probably without it. But at the same time, it's this balance of like DBT we call middle path, like this balance of acceptance and change, that I have to check in and say, okay, I'm not going to beat up myself too much because I overdid it with the social media today. And at the same time, okay, John, what are you going to do tomorrow to maybe try to limit the use? We all set those like limits, and most of the time the limit pops up, and what do? Ignore limit, for the day, right? Or ignore limit for the next hour, whatever it might be. So, I have kind of a love-hate, the content is stimulating. It feels good in the moment, but for me, I think that like if I can limit it more, that the other areas of my life would probably be better.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I know through conversations with a couple of actually, ironically, they all are new moms and therapists here. They all like have gotten off of social media or like different apps they've deleted, and they've mentioned how it's made them feel more productive as new moms. Obviously, I can't speak to that, but it's just interesting that that's like something that's like a trend within like new moms as therapists here.
And I think it's helpful, honestly, because like I think a lot of clinicians and a lot of parents can come from this place with their children, their teens, even their young adults, of being like all knowing. This is just bad. This is just bad, as opposed to being able to acknowledge that like, okay, there is some good that comes along with this. And at the same time, maybe it would be good to limit it, as opposed to just being like, oh, this is bad, you have to stop. So that's us, right? And kind of our personal relationship. But what we're really looking to get into today is more of how we're seeing social media, good and bad, impact the clients that we work with. So the first thing I really want to kind of touch on is the social aspect, right? Of how do you guys see your clients being impacted socially? Pros and cons when it comes to their use of social media. And Sam, I know you work with a wide array of different types of clients, but maybe touching on a little bit of like the littles that are using it, but then also your teens and whatnot. Like, how do you see them being impacted socially?
I see oftentimes like the FOMO piece, so like the fear of missing out piece, being the area where a lot of their anxiety spikes. So specifically like looking at Snapchat seems to be the area, and like the app in general, where they're like seeing every inch of every minute of their lives, where like, oh, they all want Snapchat. As soon as they get a phone, it's like that's the app they all want. And a lot of parents are hesitant, understandable. It's a picture sending app. And that's the one where they all have like different group chats on Snapchat, and if one person doesn't have Snapchat, then they're not included into that group, and then they might not be invited to whatever that social gathering is, which then oftentimes leads to these kids either being actually left out or having a fear of missing out. And that's where like obviously, which makes sense, their anxiety spikes. The other thing that I often see too is like kids with like even YouTube, that is a social media. And there's obviously YouTube Kids, which is like the more censored version of YouTube. I don't know if it's actually more censored. It's questionable there. But even them like knowing all of these different things and all these different terms, and it's like, you're 6, how do you know what that is? Right. So just that, like I just noticed the maturity levels for children, like all of my preteens present like they're 15, and I think a large part of that is due to social media and YouTube and the different videos that they watch, and like that big exposure to that. So
yeah, I've met some of your clients in the waiting room here, and I get what you're saying, right? That they do present like a little old person that's in that body. But I can imagine that the emotional maturity, though, doesn't come along with that presentation of being more mature. So it could be kind of deceiving in a way.
It causes a major gap for them, because it's like their emotional maturity might be here, but then their like maturity in the way they present like within social situations is here. So when it comes to like conflicts with their parents or their friends, like they're not able to maybe conflict manage the right way or know how to regulate themselves the right way, because they shouldn't know how to, but yet they're expecting them to, or even their parents are expecting them to, because of the way that they do come off as being older, even though they're 6.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, for sure. How about you, Carly? What are you saying?
Yeah. So the crowd I work with is a little bit older, but even, I see like some 10, 11, 12-year-olds. definitely noticing the same thing. I think with some of the older kids, it is like that desire, the desire to be connected and have that sense of belongingness is natural and human. You know, we all need that. I think what role social media plays in that is like the access that we have to each other. Like with Snapchat or even just texting, we have, these kids have access to their friends and their friends have access to them all the time, which to me, in my opinion, is not natural, not normal. Like, I don't want people to have access to me all the time, and I shouldn't have access to everybody else all the time. Like, you know, we should have control over, you know, just because I'm free and available doesn't mean I'm gonna spend that time with you. I still have control over my time. And that's something that I see a lot in my sessions, where it's like, if I didn't text this person back, I either might be upsetting them or I might be missing out on something. And that fear of disconnection is a really valid fear. Like, I think we all have that, like that fear of not just missing out, but being disconnected from our group, being left out of our group. That's a fear that predated social media, you know, that's something that's always been there. But I think this amplifies it because it's like a visual representation, like right in your face, and you can see that you're disconnected. And it just, I don't know, it makes it extra accessible and extra important for a lot of teenagers.
Yeah, because what you were saying, it was like kind of the first thing that popped up for me, which is like, okay, I was well, you're the youngest clinician on the team. I'm one of the older clinicians on the team at 45 years old, right? And so I was a teenager in the 90s. I was a kid in the 80s, you know? And so as a teenager in the 90s and being in high school, if I didn't get invited to a party, I'd be upset about it, right? And then maybe I would hear about it on Monday at school, how the party was, or like somebody would call me the next day on my like transparent glow in the dark phone, right? And they tell me about this party. But in today's times, you know, these kids are watching it in real time. They're seeing all of their friends getting together, doing this thing that they're now not being included in, you know, and that's just going to hit a little bit different than just hearing about it the next day, you know. There's so many things I feel like I could speak on when it comes to like the social implications and how teens, and for me especially like young adults, are impacted. One of them is dating, okay? And this is something I'm having a hard time kind of catching up with, but I've had clients that come in and they're like, oh, John, I got a girlfriend now. I'm like, oh, wow. Like, okay, like there was no mention of this a week ago at all, right? There was nothing on the horizon, right? But all of a sudden, like, oh, I have this girlfriend. And I'm like, oh, well, tell me more about that. And what it can end up being is that my client slid into someone's DMs from another school, right? Because for teenagers and young adults, everyone is usually like, most people are public and they accept all of the follow requests and all the friend requests, right? And so you will have a friend that knows somebody at another school, and then you will friend that person or follow that person. They follow you back. And so they'll come in and they like just shot a DM to someone they don't know, but they have a friend in common at another school. They start talking via social media over the course of that week. And then literally inside of a week's time, we're now boyfriend and girlfriend. And they've never even met each other in person, right? But they're putting this label on as like, this is my girlfriend, this is my boyfriend, and this is what we're calling ourselves, even though we've never met each other and we've only known each other through social media. Now, but there's another part to this, right? Because we only put our best shit out there on social media, right? We decide to take a picture. We take that picture from 50 different angles. We throw 3 different kinds of filters on it before we decide this is the picture we're putting out there. So the way that I see it happening is that like, it's not like I'm friends with you on social media. It's almost like the character that I've created on social media is friends with the character you've created on social media, but we don't really know who each other is really.
It's like MTV Catfish, that show.
What's that?
It's like when someone catfishes someone means that like the way that you present online or on like your dating profile online is like polar opposite to how you actually present in person. So like MTV had a really popular show, like 5 to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It was really popular, and it was like essentially like they would be able to like get in contact with the catfish and then the other person, and then they would meet each other in person, and like how polar opposite.
Yeah.
They would show
Usually
like
it's like a fake identity.
Yeah,
it's totally-
Oh,
usually
really?
was.
It's like completely fake person. Just yeah.
Which is something I do have to educate my clients about. Like a lot of them know, but you know, I do cover like social media safety a lot with some of my younger clients. Like, don't give out your address and all that stuff. You know, that's not new, but yeah, they're being friends with and having relationships with people that they've never met in person, which I do see like pros and cons to that, because they have a lot of clients who maybe are a little out there, or like their interests, they don't find anybody at school that like has similar interests as them, or they might just feel like alone in like who they are and the things that they like, and they can find communities online of people that they connect with, which can be really positive. But you know, safety always plays a role in that, you know, and I think we have to really make sure these kids are like very critically thinking like, yeah, okay, it's nice and validating to know that there's people out there like me, but do I actually have a vulnerable connection with this person? You know, that's a different story. And I think a lot of people confuse the two, right? We have this connection on this one thing, or maybe one or two things online. Is that a friendship? Yeah, of course, right? But like, what kind of connection is that? What is that? How is that showing up in other areas of your life? You know what I mean? I think that's something that gets a little muddy sometimes for especially the younger kids.
Sure. And the word you used there is like vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right? Like actually exposing yourself for who you actually really are is to be more vulnerable. You know, to say I like you, not knowing if the other person likes you back yet, is being more vulnerable. But you know, as you were talking, something kind of popped into my head of like, okay, so I have those clients as well where okay, I'm dating this girl in Russia, right?
Yeah.
And I broke up with the girl in Russia, and I'm dating this other girl now in Japan, and like they're now living fully then in this virtual world, okay? And which I understand what you're saying, that yeah, okay, if I'm very isolative and I don't really have social connections in this world, then this feels really good for me. But it's almost like that movie, I don't know if you ever seen it. I think it's called Ready Player One. But it's this idea, like in this movie, Ready Player One, and I might get this wrong because I'm hearing this secondhand, but it's like they created this virtual world, right? Because the real world sucks so bad. But because the real world sucks so bad, people spend more and more time in this virtual world, right? And because they're spending more time in this virtual world, they're not tending to the real world. So that continues to get worse, which makes me want to spend more time in the virtual world. So it's like the conversation I have with my clients that are dating people like internationally is like, okay, I can validate that, yeah, you're getting a sense of connection, but because you're spending so much time in this world, are you not tending to this world and missing out on opportunities of actually having a full connection with someone that can be flesh and bones here in front of you?
Yeah, I think it's hard for people to make that connection. Like, oh, okay, through my online connections, I've kind of proven to myself that I can socialize, or I am worthy of connection, and it's hard to translate that into the real world for people, because that is the source of it online, and it's easy to just stay stuck there. But yeah, not, you know, it comes with a cost for sure.
It's obviously easier to be vulnerable through a screen.
Yeah, because it's like low risk, high reward.
Exactly.
You know, worst case scenario, this person doesn't like you, whatever, they're in Japan. You know?
Yeah, you can block them. That's fine, because that's a
block
whole
them.
nother thing where they'll like block their friends on and off, and
yeah.
to be able to like, what, they're mad at them. Oh, well, I blocked them. I won't talk to them for the next week. That's another
The
big one.
blocking is a big one.
Yeah, we could totally get
We
into
could
that
totally
a little
talk
bit.
about blocking.
Yeah.
Like
or
I
leaving
do that
on
a lot.
red.
Yep. Leaving undelivered on Snapchat.
Yeah.
That means they didn't even open the Snapchat.
Yeah.
And also what you were talking about earlier, like I think on Snapchat, I don't know exactly how this works because I don't do this, but they can add people by location. You can add people that are like near you. You could add people by mutual friends. So I think that's how a lot of that happens.
Yeah.
Which again, sometimes cool, sometimes not, but yeah, it's so easy to block people, which I think again has pros and cons to it. I think blocking people in some situations could be a really helpful tool for boundary setting. If there's somebody that like really isn't getting it, you know, you trying to set a boundary or like just interacting with them is harmful to you, that could be a powerful tool. You know, I don't even give them permission to contact me. And
Sure.
for some situations that are maybe abusive, like that's really helpful. For situations that are not abusive and just like normal peer conflict, it's avoidance. You know, a lot of times it's avoidance. You know, I think people don't realize that like somebody texts you, you don't owe them an answer. You know, if you really don't want to talk to these people, don't talk to them, right? Blocking isn't maybe the solution all the time, you know, like you can kind of make that decision on your own, but it sends a message, right? The blocking sends a message to...
It does, but it's a lack of communication, right? Instead of being like, hey, you did this to me and I'm really upset about it, and this is what I'd like you to stop doing, and this is what the problem is that I have. Instead, you know, people want to avoid confrontation, so instead I could just block them. And then I'm like sending these like subliminal messages to them, and I want them to kind of be able to read my mind as to what it is I'm upset about. Because I've been, you know, I've had clients that have been on the receiving end of that, right? Where all of a sudden they've been ghosted, right? And they don't know why. And there's no explanation given, right? So again, you have like these like abilities through social media that you wouldn't have in an in-person relationship. It reminds me of, I remember, I forget who it was, but it was during COVID. And one of our clients that we were working with, one of the team members here, wasn't my personal client, was like cyberbullying another girl, right? And she was being really mean to her. And then some time goes by, and sure enough, we're like, okay, you're going back to school now. And I remember her freaking out of like, oh my God, like I'm gonna have to now see this person that I've been cyberbullying, and never really anticipated that like, oh, I'm actually gonna have to have a confrontation with this person or see this person in real life, because I was kind of hiding behind a keyboard.
Yeah. I see like a lot with the younger generation in general, the like disconnect of just communicating in person. Like that's what a lot of teens come in and they're like, well, how do I handle this? And it's like things, and I'm like, wait, how you as 13, 14 don't know how to handle this? You should know this, but they don't, because there was COVID, and then there also is like that ability to be able to hide behind a screen and not have to have these conflicts, or being able to block people. And it like speaks to the overall avoidance that a lot of the generation younger than us does often.
I've had clients send a really like heartfelt, vulnerable message, which I don't always think is bad. Sometimes it is like easier to say things over text, or like start the conversation and be like, let's talk about this more in person. I don't always think that's bad.
It's kind of like writing a letter to somebody.
Yeah. And you know, I can totally empathize with sometimes writing things out or typing things out is easier than being put on the spot and having to come up with things in the moment. So not always bad, but I've had clients before send a message like that and then block. So there's like no like opportunity to really continue hashing it out. Sometimes that might be appropriate. Again, it may be like more abusive types of situations, but I mean, otherwise I feel like it's like copping out a little bit.
Right.
You know?
If it's just like a regular conflict that you're having, like, let me like get this last word in and not give you an opportunity to even reply and say what you want to say, you know. It goes even a step further, where like I have clients that they're on Snapchat with a girl at school, and they snap each other every night for like a month or 2 months straight, but then will tell me that they've never actually spoken in person when they go to school. They will go to school, pass each other in the hallway, and pretend like they don't know each other.
Yep. I've got a couple girls struggling with that, where they think this guy's interested in them. They're you know, the guy's like spitting all their game on Snapchat at night, and in the hallway in school, they're like, you know, ignoring each other, and it's very confusing for whoever's on the receiving end of that.
Sure. And I think, again, it goes back to vulnerability, right? Where in person, you know, I'm nervous about letting my feelings be known and putting myself out there, because like, what if you don't feel the same way? Like, I'm afraid that I can't handle those feelings that will come up, you know? So it's like, you know, Wayne Gretzky, we miss 100% of the shots we don't take. I'm working with a lot of my male clients on like taking a shot of like being able to put yourself out there and being like, hey, I'd like you. Like, do you want to go hang out sometime? Or, you know, and they're afraid of putting themselves out there, but a lot more confident online. And I'll ask them sometimes, like, can you imagine what the world would look like if you could bring your online persona to your regular life? Like, what if that version of you showed up at school each day? Most of them, right? Some of them, maybe I wouldn't want their online persona to show up at school because it's kind of sketchy. But, you know, for most of them, what would happen if you can bring that version of you, the smooth dude who's like typing this up and is so smooth and is articulating themselves well, like,
Right, like you have it in you.
right, it's there.
Yeah.
But then there's that anxiety that's getting in the way when I'm actually there in front of a person. You know, how do I say this out loud? You know,
Which speaks to even like when I mentioned a lot of times with clients is like helping them work through their peer conflict. And it's like they're reading me back and forth these text messages that they have with their friend or their boyfriend or
let me
whoever
just read it to you. Let me just read it.
Hold
Here,
on, let
hold
me
on a second.
show
Let me,
you
yeah,
this.
right.
With my client, like, give me the phone.
Yeah, here. This, I'm like, which one are you? The blue or the?
And all the time I'm like, why don't you just like talk to them in person? Because emotion gets so lost in text messages.
Oh my God.
So lost. And I think that's a lot of the problem, right? Is that the other side is like inferring, oh, they're being a bitch today, when it's like, no, they're actually just like being really persistent with their boundary setting. Like they're not being a bitch.
Right.
Or they just text that way with different
Yeah.
punctuation.
Right.
Like, why did they put a exclamation mark?
Yeah.
Are they mad at me? Oh, when they just write K,
Yeah.
they're pissed.
Or there's a, oh my God, they use a period.
Yep. That too.
I use proper grammar in my text messages. My clients think I'm crazy. There's something wrong. And like, oh, you're so old, John. Right. Yeah.
Or the ... That's the other one.
I'm a huge ... guy.
That's so ominous.
That's how I talk,
It is
though.
ominous.
It's like I feel like that.
is
I like
true.
to type how I talk, and there's a lot of ... in how I talk, I guess.
I guess.
But somebody could read that and be like, John's pissed at me.
Yeah.
Like, or John's
that?
suspicious of something. That's the vibe I get from the ... It's like so mysterious.
Oh, I say I learned something today, right? And I had no idea.
You're welcome.
But knowing you, right, that's the way you talk. So it's like, I wouldn't read it that way because I know you. Yeah.
Right.
But a lot of times, for a lot of teens, they can't pick up on that yet.
Yeah.
Their prefrontal cortex is not
Yep.
fully developed. So
Yep.
it's like, and then there's that block of them actually wanting to talk to the person in person. So then it's like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the conflict never gets really resolved because they are so avoidant to talk to that person in person.
For sure.
Okay. Wow. I mean, I feel like we could probably spend a full hour just on the social aspect of this. But just so we could cover a couple of more things, I'm curious when it comes to your clients, and we don't have to spend too much time on this because I think we covered some of this during the first episode. I want to speak to the impact that social media has on motivation and getting things done. This part I think is pretty obvious, right? In that, you know, and not to kind of beat a dead horse, but yeah, every time you use social media and you get a like or you get a follow or an alert goes off on your phone, you're getting a hit of dopamine, right? That's why we keep going back to it. That's why when there's a lull in a conversation or a commercial pops up somewhere, the first thing we think to do is to go reach for that phone, kind of mindlessly. We don't have any intention behind it. It's because our brain is programmed to move towards that thing that feels good in the moment. It's kind of like the example I give with my clients. It's like Toby, right? Toby's 9 years old today. Happy birthday, Toby. Oh, I love him so much. He's right over there. But when he was a pup, I got him as an 8-week-old little puppy, and I was a single guy, and I trained him, right? And at the beginning, you know, guys know the routine. If you have a dog, I would say sit, and I'd push his little tush down, and I'd give him a treat. Sit, sit, treat, sit, sit, treat, over and over and over and over and over again. So now, 9 years later, I'm like, Toby, sit. He just does it. He doesn't know why the hell he's doing it, right? But because that behavior has been associated with rewards so many times in the past, he just does it kind of instinctively, mindlessly, right?
Pavlov dogs.
100%. So, I mean, the same thing kind of happens with that social media. And so when we're put in a situation, and I hear about this all the time with my clients, okay, they get home after school, it's time to do some homework. The computer is open, the phone is there, right? The brain is scanning, and it's programmed, this caveman brain that we have is programmed to move away from pain and towards pleasure, right? Because as cavemen, that's what kept us alive, basically, right? Away from pain and towards pleasure. And the truth is our brain hasn't really evolved all that much from the time that we were cavemen. It's only been like 10,000 years, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that long of a time, right? So given that opportunity to do the work, and our brain scans and it's looking at the work as pain, something bad, but there's this phone that's sitting there that's instant pleasure. So what I see happening with most of my clients is they'll sit down to do that work, they'll struggle to get started, and hours could go by, and then they're picking up the phone and they're scrolling a little bit, and then finally back up against the wall, they sit down to do the work, they get into that work for like 10-15 minutes, they get stuck on something, and then instinctively go to the phone, start scrolling again, messaging friends, eventually getting back to the work. But it really, I see it impacting their ability to kind of get motivated and get stuff done.
Which, I mean, I was very truthful about me doing that, even with like, we have to do notes after our sessions.
Right.
And like, honestly, the vein of all of our existences as therapists is to have to do these notes.
Yeah.
And so I avoid it because it's easier to like go on my phone and watch TikTok for an hour than to actually put in these notes that I don't want to do.
Yeah. And sometimes like in between sessions, I feel like I do need that time to mentally reset. So immediately, right, I'm like reaching towards social media, but that's honestly not actually a mental reset
No.
because
Right.
you're really just numbing or avoiding or whatever, checking out for a second. But checking out for a second isn't really putting you in that mental reset space, but it's kind of like what we're drawn to anyway, you know?
Right. What do you think we would do? Because I do that sometimes as well, right? There's a 5-minute break that we have in between clients. Some folks use that time to do their note. Me, I do the notes at the end of the week, right? But yeah, I could reach for the phone. And, you know, it's a mix of maybe I scroll through social media really quick, but I'm also like checking emails and whatnot, you know. But if we didn't have social media and we didn't have these phones, what do you think you'd be doing in between those sessions?
I mean, me and Carly do yap in between sessions
Yeah.
often.
Right.
So I guess human contact
Human
with other
contact,
people around
yeah.
you.
But like sometimes you
Right.
don't want that.
Yeah.
For
You
sure.
need to just reset. But
Well, yeah, truthfully, right? Because like someone put a question in our container. It was like something along the lines of like, what is it like to have to listen to people's problems all day? It must be so annoying. Tell me I'm wrong, I think is what it said. And I have an idea of who I think wrote that actually.
Yeah, it was my client.
But the truth is, like, look, I love working with my clients. I'm passionate about my clinical work, but I don't know anyone else that's not in the field that spends 6-7 hours of their day in nonstop conversation with people. And not only that, at times, nonstop heavy conversation about, at times, dark things. So it makes sense to, given a break, to look for a quick fix of feel good at times, right? But like I was saying when we started off this podcast about my own experience with social media, I do believe that if I didn't go to the phone and instead sat there, did some deep breathing, or even put some music on for 5 minutes, I would be better. A better version of me would show up into that next session probably, right?
because we need to process the session in a way too. Obviously, it's not the same way as the client, but yeah, sometimes you need a minute to process what you just talked about, what information you just held space for. That's a lot of what our job is
Right.
holding space, and maybe it's not even problem solving in that session. It's just kind of, you know, holding space for our clients. But that's something that it's important for us to take time to process that too. And when we're not giving ourselves a chance to do that,
Right.
it's kind of a cycle that feeds itself, right? Because again, you're reaching for the feel good thing, whether it's social media or yapping with each other, right? I mean, that's obviously healthier, but you know, like when is that happening? When is that processing happening? Maybe it's coming out in other ways, and you know, your stress is showing up, your sleep, your whatever, right? I think we have to give ourselves that time. And I mean, that's us only dealing with it for an hour. Our clients, that's their whole life,
Yeah.
you know? So
Yeah, and I see it, you know, when it comes to the clients, you know, struggling to get motivated. It's just we're living in this world of just constant stimulation of things running a mile a minute all the time. And, you know, I've mentioned this before that, like, okay, you have a million people that say that they have ADD, ADHD. You know, I wonder, like, is that just a kind of human brain adapting to the environment that we live in, that there is constant information changing. And so, yeah, of course, now I can't sit down and read 5 chapters of this book because my brain has been programmed to move from one thing to the next all day long.
I mean, I even noticed, like, with the views that I get on my food Instagram's videos, the videos that do the best are the ones that are, like, not more than 4 seconds.
Yeah.
Like, I'll have literally, like, 24 million views on one of those, and it's like,
Yeah.
Like,
what?
takes 5
It's
seconds
just you
to
pulling a
record
piece of pizza with some cheese, like, and that's it. It's not even, like, the best content I've ever given. Like, it's interesting.
I mean,
and
the cheese pulls are good content.
they are good. They are good.
A little pork roll, egg and cheese.
And those are the ones that do the best
Yeah.
because they're the shortest. That's where our attention span.
Yeah.
I even noticed it with myself. I'm like, oh God, like I'll go on TikTok and it's like, oh, this person's so long-winded. I can't deal with this. And I'll scroll too.
Right. And like when we make content for Blueprint, right? It's like, I get it. Cause it's like most videos end up being like a minute long. And to me, it's like, that's how much fucking time I need to at least get the point across to you about this information. But I go through the insights and people watch maybe 20 seconds of it. They didn't even get to the point. So it's this like line that you have to then walk of like, okay, I want people to digest this content. At the same time, like I want it to be quality content. And I'm dealing with folks that have an attention span that's like no more than 5 seconds. And in mental health, how am I going to give them something that is, you know, valuable inside of 5 or 10 seconds, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a weird time, right? It really is.
I guarantee that most people who might be listening or watching to this podcast are doing something else in the background too, right?
Sure.
Like,
Sure.
I mean, that's how I consume like podcasts and I do audiobooks. Like, that's my background noise, you know, and it's again the constant stimulation. And I mean, I have ADHD, so for me, I'm like, that's how I pay attention to the podcast is I have to stimulate myself with something else. But you know, I didn't get diagnosed with that until I was 27 years old because there was a lot of like, maybe I just need to get off my phone. You know what I mean? Like, It's really hard to diagnose, I guess, right? Because there's so much overlap with just how life is these days or other, you know, mental health disorders. Like, oh, I have a lot of clients who kind of struggle with like the what came first, the chicken or the egg. Like, am I having anxiety because I can't focus and that's stressing me out? Or am I having a genuine, you know, deficit in my attention and that's causing anxiety because I can't focus? It's like, which way does that go? And that's a really hard thing to determine. If you have constant access to the dopamine, you're not really giving yourself any room to truly kind of experiment and figure that out. It's so ingrained in our life. A lot of people, it really is hard to tell.
Yeah, that chicken or the egg question, I think, comes up a lot. I think we mentioned it in the first episode too, when it comes to kids not being able to cope with their emotions. You know, that was something, I forget exactly what was referenced, but it was something that you had said in the last episode. Okay, so we touched on a little bit of social implications, social media. That makes sense, social media, right? A little bit about motivation, but let's get into what we do here, right? Blueprint Mental Health. How do we see social media impacting the mental health of our clients when it comes to the struggles that they have or coping with the struggles that they have? What are you guys seeing out there now?
Yeah, I think a big general topic that comes up for my clients is self-esteem. I think we have a natural tendency to compare ourselves to others. And kind of what you were saying before about like from a evolutionary standpoint, that is a really adaptive thing that we do. We look to other people to understand social norms. We look to other people to just understand how to be in this world. You know, we want to fit in. We want to, you know, have that belongingness that when we were cavemen was like a survival thing, right? We needed to belong. We needed our tribe. We needed all that. So I think it's natural to compare ourselves to others. But I think the aspect of social media, I think you mentioned this before, like we really only put our highlight reels out there. You know, we only show the best parts of ourselves, or maybe even like not real parts of ourselves, or just very, very curated, right? We curate what we put out there and how we present ourselves on social media, which of course, right? Like, I'm not saying we should be posting like our mental breakdowns and like, you know, our darkest moments. Like,
I mean, people do that too.
We're gonna get to that shortly.
do that. But you know, I think it's, again, natural to compare, but when we see everybody's highlight reel, it's always, every time, 9 times out of 10, gonna make us feel bad about ourselves, because we're, you know, even just like ads and like marketing things, we're constantly being sold ideas of like what's wrong with you and what you need to fix. Like, oh, I see ads all the time. Like, I didn't even know that was something I should be caring about. You know, I didn't even know that was something that I needed to improve about myself. But now I know, and now I feel bad about this. You know, I think we just have like a constant, you know, loop of that. So it makes it a more negative experience, instead of comparing ourselves and being like, wow, what a cool idea, or wow, I love what that person's doing with their hair, their outfit, their life, that let me try that. Instead of it being an inspiring thing, which it can be, it usually is a self-deprecating thing. We really lean towards that self-deprecation because it's so, again, it's so curated. We're not seeing the full picture.
Yeah. So to what you're just saying, I know Meta did their own research on this, right? So Meta, who owns Instagram and Facebook, and so they got these results, and you can imagine this is them self-reporting, so these results are probably even worse than what they said. But I believe they interviewed, like, I forget how many, but it was teenage girls for this one study, and they found that the vast majority of teenage girls reported what they coined as problematic use. Okay, how they defined problematic use was that the girls felt worse about themselves and worse in general after engaging with the app, but then couldn't stop using that same app that's making them feel bad. And that is what I know to be as addiction, right? It's like step one, basically, right? Of, you know, powerless over my addiction. You know, my life has become unmanageable.
Like, I logically know it's bad for me,
right?
But I can't. So.
Right. I know that this is bad for me, but I can't stop, right? And you know, that is addiction, and that is what we're talking about when it comes to social media and the videos you see of like kids getting their phone taken away and like having absolute meltdowns. It presents almost like withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah, which is where I oftentimes, especially with younger clients, have parents coming in and asking me or telling me that, like, oh, well, the consequence here is that they're going to get their iPad taken away, or they're going to get their phone taken away, which is like sometimes can be helpful and other times not. Also, the question comes up always is like, well, what do you recommend for social media with kids? And it's like, I am fully in support of screen time limits. I know that parents have parental controls on Apple specifically, where they can like set it through their phone that, oh, they only can use the Wi-Fi between, and then it goes on to airplane mode or something between a certain hour, and then it ends at a certain hour. Kids and teens don't know how to regulate themselves. So it's okay for parents to step in and set that boundary of like, no, you get an hour of screen time during this time of day. Or you need to be off your phone by 9 o'clock at night. Now, will your children bitch and moan? Absolutely. But in the long run, you're helping setting them up for success, because they're going to be able to know how to regulate themselves when it comes to technology in the future.
So I might have a slightly different opinion, right? And this is what's great about being on a comprehensive team, right? That we can kind of bounce these different ideas off each other, you know? And I know we were talking about getting to like the parent thing a little bit later, but like we're here now, let's just kind of talk about it. So I agree and I disagree with what you said, right? So I think that with the little guys, and I'm kind of torn here, right? Because with the little guys, yeah, they do not have the ability to regulate. If something is good, feels good, they're going to want as much of it as they can get whenever they can get it, right? And early on, if you are conditioning your kid to just move towards all this stuff that feels good all the time, you're in trouble down the road for sure. So I think the younger guys definitely need limits, but not just a limit because this is bad. There needs to be more conversations. Like, we need to be getting buy-in from the younger guys and then understanding why this is going to be bad. And I think there really is a shift happening now that I feel like young adults today were kind of like the guinea pigs when it came to like social media and technology and dealing with mental health issues, but now what I'm seeing is like younger parents are now understanding that, how impactful social media can be and technology can be. So they're like taking a different approach and they're talking to their kids about it. Like, if you just say, this is bad, take it away, they're going to want it more, and they're not learning then how to regulate, right? So what I recommend is, limits for the younger guys with conversations that they understand, and it's a back and forth, not just this is bad, but acknowledging, hey, yeah, there's really good stuff here, and understanding why you want to do this, and it is fun, and there is awesome content. And here's some of the downsides that come along with it. But then as that kid gets older, we need to kind of let that leash out a little bit and allow them to start to kind of try to regulate themselves. Because if we just do it for them, then we don't learn the skill of, choosing to do it yourself. So I agree and disagree. I think we're on the same page, but I think as they get older, there has to be more freedom so they learn to kind of do this on their own and not being dropped off in college after having all of these limits in place and now being like, okay, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah. Well, and kind of like what you were saying, I think the conversations need to encourage the kid to have that mindfulness and critical thinking of, how am I feeling? This is something I struggle with, like, how am I actually feeling while I'm scrolling and after I'm scrolling, after I'm getting off the app? Because while you're on it, you might be like, whatever, dopamine, I'm fine. But after, you're maybe drained or whatever, how is it actually making you feel? Like, I feel like that's what the conversations should be like with kids, even, at a younger age. Just like the critical thinking and the self-awareness, the mindfulness, because then it's not even framed as like I'm taking social media away because it's a punishment and that's bad and you're bad for engaging in it. It's encouraging that self-regulation, right? Do I need to self-regulate? Did I use it for an appropriate amount of time? Do I want to modify the content that I'm, exposing myself to? They get to decide that for themselves, and it's not framed as like a all or nothing, good or bad, punishment or reward.
There should be like no moral value over it, essentially.
Right. And I have a lot of parents that have that mindset of the phones are bad and the social media is bad, it's all bad. And I can understand it. I can absolutely empathize with it because there are bad things, but it's not going anywhere. Your kids are going to go off to college and maybe be on it, or, I have a lot of young adults actually that have made the choice to not be on it on their own accord, which I think is healthier for them to come to that conclusion on their own, because it's not so extreme, and it's also just like them doing what feels right to you. And I think that's the theme of this whole thing, like what makes the most sense for you and what feels the best for you. And I think for kids and teens and young adults to be able to determine that for themselves is really important. And that's going to come with trial and error, and I think parents are almost like afraid to let the kid experience the error part and the failure part. And I think you guys touched on this in the last podcast, but I feel like that is a big piece of it. What you were talking about with, they took the phone away and the kid had a meltdown. Let him have the meltdown, right? Because they need to learn how to cope with that feeling. And obviously it sucks, to have to deal with a meltdown. And on the surface, it looks like, oh my gosh, that kid's being such a brat. They got their phone taken away and they're acting like this. But, you're also taking away their connection to their friends, their lifeline to their people, so it makes sense that it's an emotional reaction. I'm not saying it's okay to like behave in certain ways, due to that reaction, but that's an experience that they have to have.
And it makes sense, right? Like, all of us have experienced our phones breaking. And how do we react?
Not well.
We all get so pissed off, and it's like an adult meltdown, right? Where we get so pissed, we're like, well, how are we going to answer these emails, and how are we going to do this and that and the other thing? And it's like, it's the same thing.
Yeah, that is.
100%. And I think that's something, and I know we're jumping around a little bit, but yeah, I mean, we have to acknowledge, like, parents and their social media use, right? It's not just their kids, right? parents are on it too. And when I see some of these moms and dads on like the local mom to mom community pages, you know, and how they act with each other, like the modeling that they're doing for their kids, you know, of course there's cyberbullying that's happening out there based upon how some of these parents are acting, you know. So, but getting back to impact on mental health, you know, because I think that there is a lot of good out there on social media. I like to think art podcasts is something that could be a positive thing for someone to engage with. And the content that we put out on our Instagram, on our Facebook, on the TikTok, on the YouTube, like it's positive stuff. And being able to engage with that is something that's going to be helpful to someone, right? And I also think that there is for folks that are struggling with depression, anxiety, different diagnoses, like it's nice to be able to go on and learn different ways of coping, seeing that there's other people that are struggling the same way you are. You know, you really feel like you're alone, but then you go out there and there's whole different groups that are just dedicated to this. And at the same time, it can really take a turn for the worse. So on that note, what I'd like to do is kind of queue up a video, actually 2 videos that I pulled off of TikTok for us to watch and kind of speak to them and let me know what you guys think. Fair?
I can feel it coming on. Guess the player.
Was introduced to the concept of PTSD through Dissociated and started realizing that I had it. I followed quote-unquote systems on Instagram and joined Discord to finally be able to talk to people again. One day, someone started saying that they had DID. I was too warm to sleep and I was feverish and in a delusional state. I knew that what I was doing was wrong. I got a notebook and wrote down the names, ages, and genders of my alters. The next month, I lied about my life and my trauma. It was becoming me. And eventually, I was completely convinced that I actually had DID. I was addicted and obsessed with Discord. It became my entire life. My social and academic life crumbled. I would be role-playing as anime characters in class, on the bus, at home, everywhere. I had no hobbies except for Discord. Absurdity isn't absurd anymore when everyone is doing it. Trauma Olympics. People dumping trauma on each other in attempt to one-up each other and be the sickest.
What do you guys think about those videos? Because now speaking to what we just watched, there is one person that was saying that through her using Discord, right, which is another kind of would you call that social media, Discord?
Yeah,
right?
it's a big platform for a lot of kids.
Yeah. She kind of self-diagnosed herself with dissociative identity disorder, right? DID, which for those of you who don't know, is like what we used to call multiple personality disorder. It's now called dissociative identity disorder, but really didn't have it, but really played up into this whole role of someone who did have it. And then the second video that we watched was, in my opinion, I have to say, someone really kind of acting out as if they had DID. And in my understanding of it, that it doesn't look that way. It was very kind of theatrical and this switch and taking off the name tag and everything. So what do you guys encounter any of that kind of stuff with your clients?
I mean, not to that extreme, but I definitely have a handful of clients that will misuse diagnoses or like mental health terms. But also like, I see people like that or kids like that, and I think it's kind of somebody who needs a sense of identity, but also needs attention. And I bring up this word a lot with parents, this word attention seeking, because it has such a negative connotation to it. And it kind of implies that they're faking it. And like, yeah, maybe sometimes that's true, in these situations. But like, what is wrong with seeking attention, right? We all need attention. And so I see somebody like that and I'm like, they're seeking out attention in potentially harmful ways. why are they not getting it? Or like what's missing, right? Like what kind of they must not be receiving the appropriate amount or the appropriate type of attention in their personal lives, whether that means at home or with friends. And just kind of feeling lost in that. I see somebody like that and, maybe it's a little funny and we roll our eyes at that, but I'm also kind of like, they're they're trying to figure themselves out, right? They're trying to figure out what is the best way I can get this need met. Um, and as you kind of fall down that rabbit hole of being exposed to a lot of different mental health diagnoses, or you see other people getting attention or validation or community or belongingness from a mental health diagnosis, then that might be something they gravitate towards. And I think that can be dangerous in a lot of ways.
I've been seeing this for years now, like back more so, I would say back when I worked at higher levels of care. All of us have in some way or another, but you would get like what we would call like these frequent flyers, right? And these were clients that were constantly in and out of program, right? So just really quick, what we do here is outpatient mental health, right? Most folks come to us for one session a week for an hour. A step up from us is an intensive outpatient program. So that's a mixture of individual therapy and group therapy. And that's usually 3 days a week for a few hours. Step up from that is considered a partial hospitalization program or partial care. And that's folks going 5 days a week for mental health treatment, multiple hours a day, but they're coming home at night, right? In that higher level of care, we would see people that would be in and out of program. They would make their way through, get discharged successfully, and then 3 weeks later they'd be back, or 2 months later they'd be back, or there'd be another hospitalization, and then back through the system again. And when I would get that client who would be here multiple times, have years of struggling, but also tons of therapy, the question I would actually pose is, okay, what other need is being met by being in this role? And with what I saw in those videos, kind of speaks to the idea of the mental health problem becoming that person's identity. And if I am just, this is who I am, and all the conversations I'm having are about this diagnosis that I have, and there's this back and forth of who's struggling tonight, and we support that person, and then the next night someone else is struggling, and we support that person, and this person's suicidal, and that person's suicidal. Like, then that is my identity, then the question comes up, well, if I get better, then who the hell am I then, right? Who am I if I'm not this, and all my contacts and all my relationships that I have are built around this mental health disorder that I have? Then I get kind of stuck there. And that's what I kind of see, right? Even if that person was faking having that diagnosis, if you're someone that's going to fake that diagnosis and put that out online, then yeah, you're struggling. There's something going on there. Like Carly was saying, that person needs some support. It might not be DID, but there's something else that's going on there. That person needs support.
I want to speak to a little bit of how like sometimes that identity can almost provide relief. So I have a lot of clients that will come in, and obviously we were talking about DID, that's what the video showed, but autism is another one that is all over social media of like, oh, well, I must have autism. And it's obviously autism is a hard thing to diagnose. You have to get a neuropsych evaluation done by a doctor. Us as therapists can't diagnose that. So oftentimes I'll have clients come in, they might be presenting with different symptoms that might be really aligned with someone that is on the spectrum. And also times there's people that really don't have that. And also understanding like the overlap of ADHD and autism, and they're both under the umbrella of neurodivergence. So there is some overlap there. And I will have parents come in that will say, oh, well, like, I think they have autism because I saw this video online. Or I'll have a teen come in and say, oh, I think I'm on the spectrum because of this. And that sometimes can be a good conversation to have, because it's like, oh, good, I don't have to tell them about what I'm already seeing. They already are aware of it. And then on the other spectrum of it, you have to have that conversation of, well, you might just socially be a little awkward, like, and that's okay. But with the people that actually do end up having a spectrum diagnosis and maybe did find it out from social media, once they do get that diagnosis, that identity can be a really validating thing for them, because it's like, okay, wait a second, I'm not crazy. Like, these things actually make a lot of sense, and this diagnosis really helped me have a better understanding of myself.
Yeah. The way that I try to frame it to clients is like, if you're like ADHD, for example, if you are finding yourself relating to a lot of ADHD contents on social media, then yeah, it's worth looking into, right? But we can't take that as law, as a true diagnosis. And even, I mentioned earlier, I have a therapy account, and a lot of therapists like put those disclaimers in their posts, like, this is not a diagnostic tool, like this is not a substitute for real therapy, this is just like information spreading.
We should probably do that.
We should probably do that. Kind of just like from a liability thing, but also just like it really is important for people to know that, so I know that's how I ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD, is like it's something that I have suspected my whole life, and then as I'm seeing things on social media, I'm like, oh, that tracks. Yep, that's me. That's me. But I went to a professional and like got an actual diagnosis versus just being like, yep, that's it. I have it, which that experience was way more validating than, oh, I relate to all this content, going to an actual professional and getting diagnosed was the more validating thing than the social media. But, it's, I agree with you. It's, we also have to acknowledge that there's a lot of barriers to getting a true diagnosis, financial barriers, insurance, just access to the services that are required for that. So sometimes a social media self-diagnosis can be really validating, so we have to acknowledge that, but it's just something we have to be super careful with and have a lot of information on.
Yeah. I mean, I literally just had a situation where a client, young adult client of mine, in a session not that long ago, came to me and was like, hey man, like, I think I might be on the spectrum, right? I said, okay, let's talk about that, right? And sure enough, it came from first landing on a couple of things on social media. From there, he then did some sort of online assessment where he kind of scored as someone that could kind of possibly be in that spectrum. And then we start to kind of talk about it. And, that was something that did end up, like, to be honest with you, he wasn't someone that screamed autism to me, right, in session. It wasn't something I was even considering until he brought it to me and said, well, because of X, Y, and Z, that we really started to be like, maybe this actually makes sense. And he reported some things to me that he had never reported to me before because they just weren't relevant to our conversations. Now, but the conversation I have with him is like, look, dude, we could set you up to go and do an assessment, a formal assessment with a doc, and get that diagnosis. And if that's something you want, right? If you want something tangible to wrap your hands around, something that's validating, like, yes, this is why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, cool, I support you doing that. And at the same time, diagnosis or not, our treatment isn't going to change.
Exactly.
Right? Because at the end of the day, we're treating the symptoms that are coming up. And if you're struggling socially and picking up on social cues, we're going to work on that. If you're struggling with whatever it might be, we're going to work on that, whether you have the diagnosis or not. But some people just want to have that peace of mind, something to kind of validate that, like, yeah, you know what? I'm not crazy, right? These things are, I was kind of different growing up.
Yeah. And the diagnosis also can help with, like, specifically, like, people that are in school. So if it's like high school, middle school, whatever, college, being able to get accommodations, obviously the diagnosis will help there too. If there's areas that they could get some support from the, like, school in general is another piece.
Yeah. And, we were talking earlier about the constant dopamine fix from social media. And so I think ADHD is something that is coming up a lot in my sessions. A lot of my clients are asking me or like think that they have ADHD or considering that they might have it. Like, on paper, they might meet some criteria, but I have the same like conversation with them where it's like, you know what? We could explore diagnosis, but if you're having trouble with motivation, we're going to treat the trouble with motivation. If you're having trouble with executive functioning things, regardless of your diagnosis, we'll work on that, and it kind of still validates their experience without having to attach to the label. But like you said, if they're in school, they might need a diagnosis to get a 504 plan, an IEP, if that's necessary.
Yeah. Also understanding that, like, with ADHD, there is dopamine deficits. So that's where you'll see people with ADHD particularly having a hard time with regulating themselves when it comes to things that might be a little addictive. So if it's social media, if it's substances, if it's an eating disorder, things like that.
Or seeking out conflict even.
That too.
Right? They subconsciously seeking out conflict because it meets a need that that ADHD brain doesn't normally get.
Yeah, exactly.
So on that note, guys, we're just coming to the end of our hour or so, however long we've been talking. I think it's about time to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Guys, if you like what you've heard today or what you watched today, really encourage you to click on the subscribe button and follow us on YouTube. If you have a question you would like us to address in future episodes, you can send us a DM directly on our Instagram, which is _blueprint mental health. We're also on Facebook, we're on TikTok and all that good stuff. I think we're going to be throwing this on Spotify as well. But I want to thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, guys.